Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar. I'm Eric Vidal, contributing writer at the Marketing Scope and SVP of Marketing at Broadsheet Media Group. I'll be your moderator and host today. Let's go over a few quick house cleaning items for this webinar. The topic is marketing data fails, and please make sure that you ask lots of questions. Let's make it very interactive. We have a Q&A tab in the platform, so you can ask questions at any time, and we'll try to get to them during the webinar, but definitely if we don't get to it during, we'll get to it at the end. Also, there will be a link at the end of the webinar. This will be on demand, so you'll have access to this content after the webinar. We'll send a follow-up note to you with that link. We also have some great materials or content to provide you. After the webinar, you can reach out to Openprise directly and get some access to some great white papers and guides. But we also have a guide under the Materials tab. If you click the Materials tab, you can download a free guide there as well. So, having said that, our topic is marketing data fails. The title is Fix These 10 Common Marketing Data Fails to Boost Conversion. And our guest speaker is from Openprise, and for those who don't know Openprise, they actually have a platform, and they work with companies on how to automate, and automate department data and analyze and clean and enrich and unify that data. And when I say departments, they work with various departments like marketing, sales, ops, support, even HR and finance. But as most of you in the audience, we're all marketers, and so a lot of times that responsibility falls on us. And so please welcome our guest today, Alan Pogozelski, Vice President of Marketing at Openprise. Welcome, Alan.
Thanks, Eric. It's great to be here. Now, before we kick this off, I know you had a polling question or two. Do you mind go ahead and queuing that one up for us?
Yeah, I do, Alan. Thank you. I will. So I'm going to go ahead and launch the poll, everyone. You should pop up. First question is, what best defines your role? What best defines your role? Everyone see that?
Yeah, it looks like about a 50-50 mix of marketing, ops, and sales. That's great.
Oh, really? We have some salespeople in here. That's great. That way we can maybe address some of the content to address some of the salespeople in the room.
Absolutely.
Okay, great. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to show the results so everyone can see it. And, of course, Alan, you can see the results as well, correct?
Sure can.
I'm going to pose question number 2. And question number 2 is, what do you most like to do at work? And that's besides karaoke and other things. But what do you most like to do at work? It's funny, when I talk to a lot of directors of marketing or people, a little more senior like VPs, data doesn't always, they want to see the dashboards and the results, but getting their hands on the data is somewhere lower on the list. So I'm curious to hear what some of these folks have to say. And I'm going to go ahead and show those results. So question number 3.
There's a couple marketing data folks just like me here. That's awesome. Okay, well,
great.
One more.
Great. Question number 3. What do you like to do least at work? What do you like to do least at work? All right, I'm going to show those results.
It looks like there's an awful lot of folks who like implementing new marketing technologies. I love it. it's interesting. One of the ones that we rarely see are people that love working with data and cleaning up their data. And I think that's unfortunate because it has a direct effect on your ability to convert and bring new opportunities into the pipeline. So,
Alan, a lot of the people I talk to, who are directors or VPs of marketing, and especially 2 or 3 years ago when we started to get into cleaning up our data, that was pretty much the standard response was we knew we had to do it, but we don't really want to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. We hear that time and time again, and we'll talk about that in some more detail today too. Let me just start by talking about the importance of this topic. Now, let's face it, everybody wants higher conversion. Everyone wants more opportunities. Everybody wants to close more deals. Both the sales and marketing folks in the house can agree on that. But what's interesting is when I go into accounts, it seems like most folks are focusing most of their effort on creating great new content along the buyer's journey. And that's important. But the reality is that's only half the equation. The other half of the equation to boost conversion involves the data, and it involves avoiding some of the common marketing data fails we're going to talk about today. And if you can address these, you're going to see great results. You're going to be able to know who you're targeting a whole lot better and align the folks in your database with your buyer personas. You're going to be able to accurately segment so that you can put folks in the right nurturing track with content that's relevant for them. With some of the things that we're going to talk about today, you're going to be able to personalize your messages better, so you've got people who are more engaged. And by personalization, I mean something beyond hello, first name. That's going to help boost conversion rate. Certainly, if you've got better data, your attribution is going to be much more effective. You're going to know what campaigns are working and which ones aren't, so you can push more money in the right places. And the last thing about some of the data fails that we're going to talk about today is we're going to help you with scoring and lead routing so that you can follow up at the right time. Now, remember, we're not concerned just about MQLs. What we're really concerned about is converting those leads into opportunities, nurturing them along, and ultimately producing revenue. So all of those things all come into data, and so we're going to talk a bit about that today. Now, if you do all that right, your data and your prospects don't look like the guy that you see on the right here with a bunch of pieces and parts. Most companies that I work with, when I first get started, when I ask for an accurate view of what their leads look like and what their contacts look like, it generally ends up looking like something what you see on the right here. Now, my company, Openprise, was founded to help companies improve their marketing and sales data so they can launch more effective campaigns. And I got to tell you, I've seen a lot of bad data out there. And today we're going to talk about some of the most common areas that we see where your data is holding you back from higher campaign performance. And we'll talk about some of the things that you can do about it. Now, before we get started, there's one thing that I want to point out, and that is that there's no shortage of MarTech out there. Some of the companies that I work with collect different marketing technologies the way that kids collect baseball cards. They can never have enough. But the reality, though, is most of the systems that you see here, and I know there's over 5,000 listed in the latest Brinker report, most of them require really great data to be effective. Whether you're talking about ABM or predictive or advanced marketing automation techniques, to name a few, all of these things require really good data to be effective and to get the value out of those solutions. So if you look at this chart in front of me here, and you can pick out a couple dozen that you absolutely love, the way that you can improve the performance of most of those is to work with better data. So let's start by taking a look at the 10 biggest fails that are holding you guys back from higher campaign performance. So the first one is this whole concept of normalizing fields. You've got very important fields, company size, state, country, and industry, that are exceptionally important to you, but chances are they're not normalized as well as they could be. Now, what does normalization mean? Well, here's a typical example. Take your state field. If you were looking at a record for me, California, the word, and CA would both be accurate. But if you wanted to normalize those so you could report on them, you would combine them into one. It's not uncommon for us to see 150, 200 different state values in a Marketo or a Salesforce database. You want to clean those up. Start with something really simple like state and country, and then move on to more complicated ones like industry and company size. And we'll dig into this. If you start with those fields and clean them up, and we'll talk about how you can do that, number one, your segmentation is going to be better. Number two, you're going to be able to route leads more effectively because country and state are the primary drivers in a lot of people's lead routing systems. Certainly, your reporting is going to look a whole lot cleaner. There's nothing uglier than a report that has 4 or 5 different values of California that you have to share with your executive team. And certainly, it's going to streamline the way that you work in your CRM systems, whether we're talking about Salesforce or we're talking about marketing automation systems like Pardot and Eloqua and Marketo. Many of those systems use state in a big way with routing rules and with filters. And I've seen some really cumbersome filters out there where people have had to make up for bad data by adding more and more and more filter values. Now, once you've got that cleaned up, and again, state is a great one to start with because it's easy and there's a lot of ROI there, you can do a lot of great things with it. I had one customer last week that's based in San Jose. They're a security company, and they had just bought a 10-city roundtable package, and it was sort of a road show that had between 20 and 30 people in each city. And the first thing that the marketing folks were asking themselves is what cities they want to be in. And so they polled the sales team, and the sales team gave them the usual list of the biggest cities in the country. They said, oh, yeah, we need to be in New York City, we need to be in Washington, D.C., we need to be in Boston, those big tech capitals. But what was interesting, though, is a really smart marketing person who had just gone through this exercise asked the simple question, what's the real goal of these roundtables that we're doing? And the answer was, well, we're not really trying to get new leads in the door. What we're really trying to do is nurture along those existing opportunities. And that was the perfect question to be asking because based on that question, he ran a simple report in Salesforce that was a summary report based on state for all the contacts associated with opportunities in the Salesforce database. And it was very clear to him if the goal of that roadshow was nurturing, then he needed to be where the existing prospects are that are already part of opportunities. And it became really clear that the cities they needed to be in weren't those big ones, but other cities like Atlanta and Dallas and Orlando, cities that have a high concentration of people but aren't the big tech hubs that people are traditionally thinking of. Simple value where states come into play. Now, my suggestion is to work on state first and country first because they're easy and the ROI is there. If you've got a really small database, you could do this with a really simple export into Excel, clean it up, and push it back in. All you would need is a Salesforce ID and the city associated with them or the state associated with them. For other fields, though, things can be much more complex. If you're looking at industry or company size, normalizing those into a single set of values can be more complicated, particularly for industry. Now, industry is really important if you're running vertical campaigns or if you're using predictive and you want to better understand what those organizations are that are interested in your products. Industry can be very difficult if you don't use traditional SIC values. And there are many of you guys out there that are in that boat. A good example, I was, before I joined this company, running demand gen for a very large IoT player that was involved in cellular connections. And SIC codes weren't relevant for me. I had a category where I had companies like Coca-Cola who had these freestyle soda machines that can make like 100 different flavors of something. And I had New York Transit Authority in the exact same vertical. And the reason I did that is I was looking at vending as a category. All those different devices all connected through cellular networks and are able to provide information that way. So for me, my custom industries didn't align with SIC codes, and I had to spend a great deal of time normalizing those for what I wanted to do. If your company is targeting folks that don't have a nice SIC code mix that aligns with their industries, I'd recommend you spend the extra time to build out your own custom industries because you'll use that field for virtually everything you do in products like Marketo and Salesforce. Now, the second fail that we see a lot, and it's hard to believe that this is happening, but I guarantee you, if you run some reports, you'll find a little bit of this at your company. And that's the phantom owners of accounts and leads and contacts. Now, if your goal is higher conversion, the reality is if no one is following up on those leads and contacts, then they're not going to convert. And while we don't normally look at this as part of marketing operations, it's certainly part of sales operations, and it's worth doing. People leave companies all the time. When they leave, sometimes there's manual bulk reassignments that happen, and often they don't work out as well as they should. And there are a lot of companies that have some black holes with lead routing, where they start off, let's say, routing by state, and then they fine-tune within Salesforce, and they route by, let's say, zip code, and the zip code is missing. Now, if you're a marketer that cares a lot about conversion, what I suggest you do first and foremost is run a quick report, a summary report in Salesforce, if you have it, that lists everyone who owns leads and contacts and the number that they do. And I guarantee you're going to find some phantom owners, and that's going to be hurting your conversion rate. Now let's talk about the next one, which is job level and job function. Eric, I think you had a question about this that you could poll the audience with. Will you cue that up?
Yeah, will do. So the question I just launched, are you using job level, job role, and industry in your segmentation and personalization efforts? I'll wait just a few more seconds before I stop this.
Okay.
Sorry, I'm going to show the results. Are you able to see it too, Alan?
Awesome, I sure am. It looks like most of you guys are using those fields, which is awesome. But it looks like about 1 in 4 of you guys aren't, which is a big problem. So let's talk about this a little bit. If there's one set of fields that's most important to making this work, it's job function and job level. These are critical for things like lead scoring to make that work, for putting people in the right nurturing tracks, and for being able to segment well. And if you think about it, this applies to other products as well beyond just marketing automation. If you're trying to do predictive analytics, you need to know what those job functions are and job levels are that are producing the results that you need. So, at the very least, we recommend that you get the information that you've got and you use it. And by that I mean just about every campaign you're going to run with a third-party provider, like a field event or a syndicated content program, often includes these fields. And what I found is very often administrators of Marketo and Salesforce and Pardot don't include this because they realize that there's not too many folks that are using this information and that they don't have that many values, so they don't even bother. Now, I recommend you populate those fields whenever you can, even if you haven't done so consistently in the past. Now, that's going to leave you with some normalization problems later on, but it's a step forward. Some better ways that you can work to fix this, better than just bringing in some other values, is working with third-party data providers. They're good to a point in that they can provide you with this information. The downside is that most of them require an exact match. So, for example, if you've got a guy named Bob Smith at Toda.com as an email address, and they don't have Bob Smith, many of them won't be able to provide you with job level and job function. Another way that works that's even better is to use a data automation solution. And they're a little bit different in that their approach is they parse out titles to provide this information. So, for example, a data automation solution could look at a title like Assistant to the Vice President of Demand Gen, which is a really tough title to classify. And even if that person didn't show up in a database like ZoomInfo or Data.com, it could still recognize, based on the keywords within that demand gen is in marketing, so they can put them in a marketing role. And these solutions also would understand things like the idea that an assistant is lower level than a vice president, but more important. So they would know that an assistant to the vice president is a really junior level role, not a very senior one. Now, one other thing that I should point out about job functions and job levels is it is very important that you take a good look at your industry and you apply a set of rules around your specific industry. And I'll tell you a couple examples where this is important. If you're using generic job levels and job functions and they're not industry specific, if you work in an industry like banking, you'll know that a vice president is actually a pretty low-level role. That means they manage a branch of people. And there are thousands of vice presidents at your garden variety bank. Now, vice president means a whole lot more different things in different places. If you're in government, a term like secretary is really, really high up, not low. And another example, too, we see this all the time, engineers, for instance. The term engineer can mean a lot of different things in different industries. So an engineer in software is very different than an engineer who works in a railway company, and that's very different than an engineer who works in a shipping company. So it's worth investing the extra time and effort in getting these two field values right for the specific industry that you target.
Those are great points, Alan. Great points. We deal with the same kind of challenge, in our organization as well, with different types of titles like that.
It's funny, though. So many companies don't look at this, and then they realize that they miscategorize people and put them in the wrong nurturing track, and they send the wrong content, and they wonder why it is that so many people opt out. So job function and job level are exceptionally important in just about everything you do, in terms of nurturing, in terms of segmentation, and in terms of scoring. Now, another one that pops up a whole lot is about basic personalization. Now, I was in a client office about a month ago, and one of them was telling me that their data was so bad that they were afraid to even use first name in their emails because they had done some work early on where they weren't capturing the information, or they're using third parties that threw everything in caps their way. And this person was terrified about shouting to his prospects in the very beginning of an email. And the reality is that does happen a lot. Now, my suggestion for folks like that, if you have a small database of only a couple thousand leads, this is something you could do with a really simple export. You can use, put it into Excel, use a function like proper, which will capitalize the first word of a first name, and then you could push it right back into Salesforce or Marketo again, you'd be good to go. The challenge with that approach, though, is that you end up doing a one-time fix, and your data is constantly changing. People are constantly adding new data. So those one-time fixes, can work great in an instant, but they're not really a long-term solution. Long-term, you want to go with a system that can automate the process. Now,
Alan, we had a question just a few minutes ago. Maybe it's just right time to ask it, but how often should I refresh my database?
Sure. That's a great question. The short answer is in real time, that you never want your data to go stale. There are companies that will do a one-time refresh, and they'll clean up their capitalization issues and their function, and issues around job function and job level. But the reality, though, is data atrophies so fast, and there are so many people working on your database and sales, and you're running so many campaigns that put in new information, that any one-time fix will be obsolete in a matter of days or weeks. So, my suggestion is that you run these systems in real time behind the scenes, so they're constantly looking for changes in your marketing automation and Salesforce automation systems, and can make those changes for you in real time. So that's a really important point. Now, I know that there are some companies, now there are some that are budget constrained, and and they're not going hog wild buying new MarTech because they simply don't have the budget. And in those cases, some one-time fixes might get you over the hump in the short term. But it's best to be thinking long-term and about the incremental ROI that comes from having good data and running more effective campaigns. The hack that I just mentioned, for instance, with first name is great as a one-time shot. You wouldn't even want to think about doing that with last name because there are a lot of Irish and French names, for instance, the Le's, the La's, the O's, anything with an apostrophe that involves a whole lot more complexity. And that's where a data automation solution can come into play. Now, so given all that, spend some time cleaning up your data so that you can do that fundamental personalization. I'm amazed about how many really big companies in the Bay Area are afraid to even do this and spend time on the basics. If you do it well, you can open up all kinds of new avenues. This is an example that I included from Serious Decisions last week. Now, there are a couple folks on my team that were pondering going to that event that's actually going on right now, and they were thinking about it and decided against it. They got this really great offer from the Serious folks that not only took into account first name, but geography as well. They realized that you can get to Las Vegas from San Francisco for between $50 and $100 on a good day, and you can be there for even a day. It's only a 45-minute flight. So they put together a campaign based on folks that were in demand gen and marketing operations just for the Bay Area, reminding them that, hey, it's not too late and the trip is really, really short. So this is a really good example of folks taking into account all of the key fields that we've been talking about and using them in their marketing campaigns. It does make a big difference. These guys realize that people who are close by are much more likely to respond to this offer than folks that are, a 2-hour, 3-hour plane fare away. Or flying that flight away.
Yeah, that's a good point. Hey, Alan, we have. Let's get to question 5 in the last part of the poll here. Okay.
Oh, okay.
I'm going to go ahead and pose the question. So it's live now. Question is, what's your confidence level in your data quality on a scale from 1 to 10? 1 to 10, with 10 being the best. So I'll go ahead and launch that. Hold on to it for a few seconds. While I'm doing that, just a quick reminder for everyone on Twitter, there is a conversation going on. The hashtag is MarTech, MarTech, hashtag MarTech on Twitter. So there's some people from this webinar continuing the conversation right now and definitely after the webinar. So you might want to check that out, everyone. Hashtag MarTech on Twitter. And I'm going to go ahead and stop the poll, and I'll show the results.
Yeah, looks like some people are, most people tend to be, on a scale of 1 to 10, about halfway in between.
Yeah, they feel pretty good about it.
Yeah, and that's actually not bad. Of course, those are the folks that are on this webcast, so they know that there's some data quality issues out there, and it sounds like they've been addressing them. That's really great. What I do find is there are a lot of companies out there that think they might have a problem but haven't taken the extra steps to find out if that's really true or not. And we'll spend a little time at the end of the webcast talking about, how you can benchmark your data and see whether you really have a problem or not. There are some companies that I talk with that think that they have huge problems, and it turns out they're really much more trivial than they thought. And I find a few customers that are in the exact opposite boat. One of the typical things that happens that I've seen is this data fail number 5, which is all about duplicate data. I have had some customers have come to me and they said, well, geez, we think we have this huge problem with duplicates. And the reality is they don't, but we identify other issues that they have. Now, for companies that have pretty loose rules around how Salesforce is used and how sales folks work, typically the duplicates do become a problem. And duplicates, I got to tell you, they're really an unappreciated but very difficult problem to solve. And here's what happens. Salespeople aren't compensated on keeping their database clean. They're compensated on closing business. And so they tend to do the minimum amount they need to be successful. And part of that means creating opportunities. Very often they'll just log in new leads rather than checking to see what's already out there. And then the second thing we find is that, particularly for niche spaces, you see the same people who come up again and again. They'll go to all the events in the space on that topic. They'll come in again and again, and sometimes admins won't append the records properly. And so you end up with a lot of duplicates. And the reality is it's a much bigger problem than most people give it credit, and here's why. Typically, if you've got a couple duplicate leads and contacts for the same person, and those people come in the door a second time, generally end up with some lead routing issues where ADRs are following up when an AE is already talking to that lead, and that also causes some confusion. If you've got multiple leads for the same person, it means your lead scoring is definitely not working. And it also means that you're really not going to be able to do an accurate job of attribution. And there are a lot of companies out there that spend a lot of money on attribution tools to identify which campaigns are working and which ones aren't. And the reality is all those implementations are sabotaged if you've got duplicate leads and duplicate contacts. That those products simply can't work if you've got a lot of dupes. Now, the last thing I'll mention about duplicates, and this one actually does drive behavior we've seen in market ops in particular, is it's not uncommon for you to have 10, 20% of your leads being duplicates, and that's costing you money because there are many marketing automation providers that price their solutions based on the number of people in their database. And many of them are very aggressive about sending invoices a month before they're due saying, hey, look, your database is now X, you've been paying for Y. Here's a big uptick of 10, 20, 40% in terms of what it's going to cost you. So, getting rid of those duplicates and properly merging them is going to save you money, not just from your marketing automation solution, but it's also going to make your campaigns much more effective. Now, I have to tell you that I've mentioned a couple hacks that you can do in Excel if you have a small database as a one-time fix. Dealing with duplicates, there really isn't a good version of this as a hack in Excel. The logic around what you're going to keep as a surviving record is very complicated because you do want that whole campaign history to be merged properly. And you do have to think through what the surviving record should be. Do you want the first one, the second one? Does it matter what the campaign or the lead source is? That gets to be really, really messy. So I wouldn't recommend trying to knock that out by hand. The good news, though, is there are plenty of products out there that will tell you about your data quality as well as your duplicate problem for free. Openprise has ones, but there are other providers who do that as well. A lot of third-party data providers do too. My recommendation is to spend a few minutes, run a quick diagnostic that won't cost you a penny, and you'll learn very quickly if you have a problem. 1% or 2% duplicates is not that big of an issue. 10% or more is having a really big impact on your conversion rate. There we go. Let's talk a little bit about some of the data fails with lead scoring. And I'm a huge fan of it myself, but that's primarily because my data is really, really good at Openprise. We pride ourselves in managing that very well. But, the dirty little secret about marketing automation is that there are very few companies that have salespeople that trust lead score. I mean, they just fundamentally don't. And here's why. If you take a look at a typical lead score, many companies say that if you have a score of 100, it suddenly becomes a marketing qualified lead in MQL and you're off and running. Most companies break up their scoring based on demographic and behavioral. The behavioral stuff is pretty easy. You click on a link, you get some points. You click on a page, you get some points. You download different pieces of content or attend a webcast, and you get points for that as well, too. That most companies can handle. But the challenge is that most companies can't handle the demographic stuff, the job roles, the job levels, the company size piece. And so what ends up happening is because most companies don't have that information, they put a lot more weighting on the behavioral part of it. And when they do that, what ends up happening is a whole lot of obvious leads that aren't very good show up with really good lead scores. Typically, let's say you're not selling to students and to educational institutions, you'll see professors and you'll see students showing up getting these 300, 400 lead scores. They're doing research, but their MQL score goes way above 100. They send it off to the ADR, and the ADR looks back at it and says, this is obviously a crappy lead. We don't sell to students and professors. What are you guys doing in marketing? What ends up happening is because you don't have those fields, your lead scores send the wrong leads up. Inside sales and AEs look at this and very quickly say, gosh, this system doesn't work. And then they've lost credibility and they don't use it anymore. So my recommendation is that you put the extra focus on things like job function and job level. That's available either through your data provider, like a ZoomInfo or a data.com or, a full contact, one of those providers, or you work with an automation provider like Openprise that builds this in. The payback you'll get in terms of lead score quality will be 10 times higher, and you'll start to get people that believe in it. Knowing who to follow up on based on lead score has a definite impact on conversion, so it's definitely worth your time to invest the extra effort to get the fields you need to make that successful. So let's talk about another fail that I see quite a bit. Most companies in enterprise software these days have really great freemium offers or 14-day free trials to test out a product. But what's interesting is I see that very few people that are marketing operations and demand gen use what's coming on in the product databases from these free trials and push them into the marketing automation engine so that they can tailor their nurturing offers. If you think about it, if someone likes your product well enough and is interested enough that they're willing to take the time to try it, learn how to use it, and play with it, they're probably some of your most effective leads. We know that's the case here at Openprise. And what I see happening is very often that information in their product database when they set up a free trial isn't correlated with what's going on in their marketing automation solution. So they're not getting the right kinds of offers. If there's one thing that I'd like you guys to do today is go back and take a good look and see if you have this integration. Chances are you don't, and you're missing out on a big opportunity. When someone starts a free trial, you need to be changing your nurturing offers to reflect that they're doing a free trial. You need to talk about the really nifty capabilities that they're using or not using, but that they should try. This is the time to do it. If you're sending mid-level content or late-level content that's not product-focused in their middle of a trial, then you're really missing out. So definitely take the time to make sure that integration is there and that you're taking advantage of it. At the very least, if you have a small number of trials, make sure that you're at least logging that information manually into marketing automation solutions so that you can put the right set of offers in front of people. Related to that, let's talk about another one. And I got to tell you, if there's one way that you can tick off your sales team as a marketing person, it's by sending an offer out like this that you see right over here to someone who just signed to become a customer. And little fails like this are ones that happen a lot more than people would like to think. It ticks off your customers. It ticks off your sales team. Your customers end up wanting that discount that they didn't get. So one of the most important things that you can do is tell the difference between a prospect and a customer in your marketing automation solution. Now, the challenge here is if you don't have integration between those two systems, then you're in a lot of trouble because you won't know. My suggestion is to take the extra time to tie in those two systems together. Whatever your system of record is that identifies a customer, whether that's coming from finance or whether that's coming from your product tool, whatever it is, make sure that integration is there. It will save you a lot of headaches. It will save you a lot of frustration. And it'll make a big difference in terms of your effectiveness and honestly, your relationship with your sales team. Now, if you can't do that,
Alan. I've seen this happen so many times over the years.
Oh, yeah, it's crazy. I've actually seen a couple of examples. I was going to use them today, and I thought I wouldn't embarrass some of our MarTech vendors that we work with. It happens a lot, and it's easily avoidable if you take the time to make the integration work. So my suggestion is spend that extra time, get familiar with your APIs and make it work. If you're on a very, very tight budget and you don't have the ability to do this, the alternative, and this isn't a good one, but one alternative is to make sure that your sales folks are incented to keep Salesforce or whatever your Salesforce automation tool is up to date. I am aware of companies where compensation doesn't happen if something isn't in Salesforce. So if a deal isn't marked as closed won, and the type field for account isn't marked as customer, your reps don't get comped. That's not as good of an approach, but it does help offers like this from not going out. So be really, really careful about this one. It makes a huge difference in your relationship between sales and marketing and also in your ability to convert. Okay, so let's talk about another important topic, which is third-party data. Now, there's a lot of misconceptions about what third-party data can do for you, and this, I mean, all those different data providers. There's a couple dozen of them out there, on what they can do and what they can't. And I think the primary perception is that, boy, if I just buy some third-party data from somewhere, my data will suddenly be clean and I'll have everything I need. And the reality is that that's not really the case in many cases. Typically, you can get really great stuff out of those third-party providers, things like direct dial info, and you can enrich your data with some missing values. And this is exceptionally important. In my company, we have a couple of different data providers that we work with simultaneously. But the challenge is that there's two big issues here. The first one is that you need to understand what that data provider can do and can't do for you. For example, if your assumption might be, if I've got a third-party data provider, that means I've got job level and job function information knocked out. The reality is that's the case sometimes, but certainly not always. There are a lot of data providers that rely on an exact match for them to enrich a record. So, for example, if you have an email address like bobsmith@toyota.com, and that data provider doesn't have Bob Smith in its database, many of them will not be able to understand that Toyota, or look at the domain address and say that, oh yeah, Toyota's an automotive, that person is automotive. Or, oh yeah, by the way, there's someone who looks a little bit like Bob Smith, Robert Smith, and he's an engineer. Many of these systems won't do that, and they do have some fuzzy matching issues. So companies think that they've solved their enrichment process by going with one of them, and they find that their match rate is only maybe 40 to 60%. Some of the better ones can do 70, 80%, but that still leaves a lot on the table. Now, the other things that these providers aren't going to do is the full set of data cleansing that you need to do. Things like lead-to-account matching, so that your leads get routed to folks that are managing accounts, not just raw leads coming in the door. Many of them can't handle things like merging all your duplicates because they just don't have the intelligence behind them to make that work. So you shouldn't rely on these companies to handle all the issues we just talked about. The second issue that I see often is companies that have multiple third-party data provider data, and they've chosen, for whatever reason, not to consolidate it. And I see why companies do this. You know, if let's say you're working with a company like ZoomInfo, and they've got some great data, you might be concerned about overwriting existing records. And so you decide you want to put them all in a custom field. And then you decide you want to work with a different data provider. And then so you put that information in a different custom field because you don't want to overwrite the previous stuff. And then you end up working with a third data provider, and that happens quite a bit. Most larger companies have multiple data providers. They don't feel comfortable overwriting any of the other data, so they create a third set of custom fields. And so what you end up with is 3 different sets of demographic attributes that you're afraid to roll up into one that you can use. And I've seen some really squirrely logic for how that works. So my suggestion is this. Number one, that if you have one provider that you're working with and only one, that you consider normalizing all your data to their standards. I'm not saying overwrite data if you already have it, because most people trust their salespeople more than they trust third-party data. But when you have open fields, say, all right, I'm going to normalize to those values. All my state values are going to come in as written out like California rather than CA. I'm going to use their industry values. I'm going to use their roles. That would simplify things a bit. But what I would think, though, for bigger companies, if you have multiple data providers that you have worked with or are currently working with today, it makes the most sense to spend the extra effort to build in the normalization with tools to align all 3 of those together, all 3 of those systems, so that you've got a common set of standards. If you've got job levels for, let's say, 20% of your database in one provider and 80% from another provider and 40% from a different provider, you need to consolidate all those together to get really the full use out of them. And the challenge is most data providers have their own set of standards. There's no unifying set of industry values, for instance, aside from SIC codes and ICIS codes. There's, for things like company size, very often one vendor will say, oh, yeah, that company is 1 to 50 employees. Well, the other, 100, let's say 51 to 100, 101 to 1,000. Your next data provider could say, oh, yeah, that's 1 to 100, and their tranches can be different. So it's really important to take the time to make sure that you're normalizing data across those different providers. Otherwise, each incremental one isn't more valuable than the previous one. So take a good look at what your data provider strategy is and how you're using third-party data from different providers, and make sure they're all in sync and normalized. Otherwise, you're missing a lot of the value that they can provide. Now, let's talk about the go ahead.
Hey, Alan, I had a question here. I think the timing's right. Somebody asks, I know it's important to have as much data as possible for better segmentation, but is it possible to have too much data? They put too much in all caps. Should you start small and grow?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I don't agree with the idea that more data is better than less data. The reality is if you can't take action on that data, it's of absolutely no value to you or to anyone on your team. So collecting data providers is probably not the best way to go. It's all about making that data usable. So I would rather have 4 or 5 fields that I can depend on than 100 fields that are so sparse that they're not usable, or have so many different values that you can't make it work. That's a really big fallacy, I think, in database marketing, is that more is better than less. The reality is trustworthy data that's normalized and standardized is worth a lot more than just having a bunch of different fields that you can't really use. Make sense?
Yeah. Good answer. Thank you.
Yeah. So let's focus on the 10th one and the final data fail, which is really not understanding what you've got to work with. I do talk with companies all the time that have really great data and it's better than they thought. That they don't have the duplicate problem that they thought they did, but they have other problems. Again, with fields like job function, job level, or with lead to account matching, or with lead routing, or with things like those phantom lead and contact owners we talked about earlier. And my recommendation is simple. There are lots of tools out there that will analyze your data for free. Openprise is just one of them. Takes a couple minutes. Start with that and get a pragmatic view of what your data is. If you realize that you're in really, really bad shape, having the statistics behind how many missing email addresses you have, how many bad values you have, how many missing addresses you have, it makes it very easy to quantify the problem and make a decision about whether to invest or not to invest. And at the very least, it'll let you know about some of the challenges that you've got that you didn't know about. So, Openprise has a data diagnostic. There are other tools in the market as well. All of them, as far as I know, are free. So definitely take the time to make that investment to know what you have to work with so you know where to focus all of your time. So before we hit the Q&A session, there's a couple things that I'd like to point out in terms of things that you can do if you want to improve your data quality so that you can improve conversion. And all of these will help you in identifying and fixing some of the fails that you have. The first one is, as I mentioned before, if you haven't done a data diagnostic, do one. They're free. They only take a couple minutes of your time, and they'll let you know exactly what you're working with. The second thing, I mentioned job function and job level a lot because it's so critical for lead scoring and for segmentation and for personalization. There are databases out there that you can access for absolutely zero cost. Openprise has one as well. There are thousands and thousands of job titles and the logic behind them so that you know what you really have to work with. You can send folks like Openprise some masked version of a customer ID so that we don't have it. And if you were to send us a list of titles, we'd send you back, based on your industry, what job function and job level you have. Again, that is absolutely free. And if you haven't seen what some of these tools do to clean up your data and to enrich it with new information so that you can use it, and also take care of things like lead to account matching and merging all of your dupes, you can see a demo at openprizetech.com. I believe that there's an online one that's only 8 minutes of your time, and you'll get a better idea for what's possible. And the last thing is, if you have any questions about data fails and about how to improve your MarTech data, always shoot an email off to info@openprizetech.com, and those folks are happy to help. So at this point, I think I should turn it back to you to talk about some questions. Eric?
Yeah. Thanks, Alan. I'll add one other thing to this. If you just go to the openprizetech.com website, there's a lot of other resources on there as well. There's obviously the demo, but and the free diagnostic, but there's a lot of ebooks, white papers. I know you guys had a recent report that came out. Some of that data could help as well. That's a really good point. Yeah, there is some nifty new stuff out there. We did a report on third-party data providers that's definitely worth taking a look at, that identifies what most companies are doing with these, the challenges they have, and even some of the providers and some reviews about working with them. There's also things out there like data governance documents as well. So as you start to clean up your data, if you're in marketing, you're probably also working with your sales operations counterpart. There's some really great data governance documents out there that can help spur a conversation to help get everyone on the same page about what needs to be done and how to fix that. So I would definitely take a look at the resources page there too. Thanks a bunch. Great. And remember to continue the conversation on Twitter with #MarTech. Let's see here. So one of the questions here that was asked earlier in the session that I didn't get a chance to get to, but this person from a smaller company. They have about 15,000 people in their database, and they're asking, can I do all of these things, or most of these things you mentioned, in Excel or Marketo or whatever platform they're using?
Sure. Yeah, if you've got a small database of let's say, 15,000 names, that's a whole lot easier than if you have millions of them. There are some things that you can knock out with Excel on a one-time basis, things like first-name capitalization that we talked about. Easy enough to do on a one-shot basis. Exporting the data using a function like proper that capitalizes the first word and then pushing it back in. The challenge with that, though, is that really doesn't scale. So your data is constantly changing, and you can't invest that kind of time to do that over and over and over again. So as you get bigger, your data becomes more cumbersome. Even those simple things are things that are best done with marketing automation solutions. There are also things that are very difficult to do, like deduping things. If you only have 15,000 names, you may be able to run a report really, really quickly. And if you only have, let's say, 100, 200 of them, you can do it manually. If you've got more than that, suddenly that's where you start to need to look to data providers and, more importantly, data automation solutions to take care of this stuff because that's what they're designed to do.
Yeah. So another question. How about fields that we are missing information or misspellings? With a large database, that seems to be a lot of work.
Oh, yeah. It's a massive amount of work. And those things are best automated. Fields like state, country, fields that have phone numbers that need to have the right formats based on the country you're in, that's stuff that you really can't handle on your own. And that's stuff where you need to look for a provider to help you out with that. Basic misspellings, for instance, are things that are easy to fix in some cases. For example, email addresses that might have .com instead of .com is a really common one. Data automation solutions will fix those for you automatically because they've already got a system of rules in place to keep an eye on your data and constantly correct them. With large databases, though, the reality is you're going to invest weeks and weeks and weeks of time doing it manually, and then 2-3 weeks later it's going to be messy again. So with a large database, it makes sense to look for a provider to help you out.
Yeah. So, okay. So I think that wraps up all our Q&A, Alan. I think we can give everyone a few minutes back, just under an hour. Alan, thank you so much for sharing these best practices, sharing the different fails and how to avoid them. And for everyone who is attending right now, you will get a thank you letter with a link to the on-demand webinar. And if you want the slides or any other information, please reach out to the email that is on this last slide, and it's info@openprizetech.com. I'm Eric Vidal. Thank you so much for joining this webinar. Appreciate your time.
Thank you. This does conclude today's conference. We thank you for your participation. You may now disconnect your lines at this time, and have a great day.